Hello and welcome to another episode of Chocolate Cake on Tuesday. I am your host, Charlotte Emma. Welcome to my lounge. Please grab, of course, a slice of chocolate cake and a cup of tea and join me in the lounge for another episode of Chocolate Cake on Tuesday. My favorite scene in the whole movie is when he's running the 400 right at the last moment. He is throwing his head back with his shoulders open, and basically there's this commentary going while he's doing this. I mean, it looks kind of funny. He's speaking to Jenny, his sister, and he's basically telling her that, yes, Jenny, God made me for a purpose. He made me for China, where he was later a missionary, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And this is just the most beautiful story of ambition for me. Welcome back to Chocolate Cake on Tuesday. This is Charlotte Emma, your host. This is episode number 8. And you are in the lounge today. Hopefully you have your slice of chocolate cake with you. Some announcements before we get to part 2 of our ambition episode is that this is episode 8 and I will be doing 10 episodes in total for this season. Whether we do another season or we start a different podcast, or I don't know what's going to happen next year. But this is going to be the end of the first season in 2 episodes time. So after this one, we have 2 more. One, an exciting interview with a friend of mine who has just completed a very cool race. It's a sporty episode. So if you are interested in sports, keep an ear out. And I hope you will enjoy that. I'm very excited. And then the last episode will be released on my birthday, December the 5th, which happens to fall on a Tuesday, so I couldn't resist. And I'm thinking of doing an AMA episode. A couple of you asked, what is an AMA episode? Very good question. It's basically stands for Ask Me Anything. And you could ask me anything, whether it's questions about me, or questions about the Bible, questions about some tips on womanly things, I don't know, anything, and I have to answer them. So I think that would be pretty fun. So announcements over. Let's jump in to episode number 8, part 2 of ambition. What is it and what is it all about? In part 1, there was a lot of personal stories that I shared. I hope you enjoyed that. We looked at the dichotomy, or what was the word now? The antinomy of power versus weakness and how God can display his glory through both. I'd actually like to spend a little bit more time today focusing on the difference between these two, how God does display his glory between both. We get into that naturally. We're going to be talking about the risks of success. We're also going to be hearing some tips from 3 different people for how we can make an impact in the world. So this is not my advice. This is actually advice from 3 different people that I've selected, and I hope you enjoy. And yeah, we do get into a little bit of the power versus weakness like we did last week, but just a little bit more technically. So hopefully you'll find some helpful tips. And then for anyone who is struggling with the idea that our success, will lead to God's glory, don't worry, because I have a section right at the end where we will address this question. I think it's a good question, an important question. I don't attempt to answer it in full in this episode because I think it deserves an episode on its own. But definitely we can touch on it because it's difficult to wrap our heads around God, first of all, and then God getting all the glory for what we do. And so yeah, if you have that question, don't stress, we'll be tackling that later on as well. So let's dive right in. Okay, so for the first segment of this part 2, we will be looking at the risks of success. And yeah, as I said last episode, as we're talking about ambition, we've been mentioning it's okay, it's great. In fact, it's encouraged if it's for God's glory. And sometimes, of course, we don't think in our heads, look, I'm going to take all the glory for myself, because that's morally wrong. Even if you are not a believer and you're listening to this, we realize that maybe boasting is not right, but being proud of our achievement is. Even as a non-believer, I think we can differentiate the difference between the two and feel like it's not very morally correct or socially acceptable to go around arrogantly looking and seeking and openly seeking for recognition, right? It's frowned upon socially to be arrogant. No one likes to be around an arrogant person. But I want to talk about today these heart issues. The Bible says that God sees the inner workings of our hearts. We feel the inner workings, but God can actually look at them and see them. They're not invisible to Him. They're entirely visible. And these are the kind of attitudes that I want to talk about. So it's not so much an arrogant way that we conduct socially or in public, but it's the arrogance that we feel in our hearts, or the ties in our hearts that kind of keep us from giving God the glory, or keep us from humbly walking through our success. So if you've done something that you've been pretty successful in, and you find it really hard to remain humble and meek in that place, that's like perfectly normal. And that's what I want to talk about. The first thing I want to do is read from Judges 8. This is the story of Gideon. It's like the end of his story. We will get into actually the beginning of his story in a little bit. But first I want to focus just on after he's had his success. We'll get into this later, but he was a nobody who received the power of God, and all of a sudden he was a warrior and he led 300 men into battle, and they got victory over an entire army. I'm reading from chapter 8, verse 22. Then the Israelites said to Gideon, "Be our ruler. You and your son and your grandson will be our rulers, for you have rescued us from Midian." For context, they did not have a king yet. They just had judges, which were basically warriors that defended the country, but they didn't rule over the country. But Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over you. However, I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from the plunder you collected from your fallen enemies." The enemies being the Ishmaelites, all wore gold earrings. "Gladly," they replied. They spread out a cloak, and each one threw in a gold earring he had gathered from the plunder. The weight of the gold earrings was 43 pounds, which is about 20 kilograms. Not including the royal ornaments and pendants, the purple clothing worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains around the necks of their camels. Gideon made a sacred ephod from the gold, and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. An ephod is what the priests used to wear, actually. It's an item of clothing, a garment. It's a sleeveless vest that the priests used to wear, and it was sacred, and they didn't wear this permanently. They would wear this on special occasions, and some kings later on in the story of the Bible, Saul and David, they would request the ephod specifically. I don't know if it's this one or whichever one they were using at the time, to wear so that they would have, I guess, more access to God. In their culture in that time, they wore this ephod when they were asking God something specific. And so Gideon made this from the gold and kept it in his hometown. But soon all the Israelites prostituted themselves by worshipping it, and it became a trap for Gideon and his family. So for me, this just represented how it was a very small act. Oh, just an earring from you and an earring from you. And he made it into a garment of clothing. What's so harmful about that? So outwardly, it doesn't appear arrogant. It doesn't appear harmful. But then just something so small was used as an idol that brought the people's attention away from God to this ephod. Why? How did this happen? Well, I looked into a little bit of what the ephod was used for, and I told you this already. It was used by kings in the future times and the priests to ask God something specific. Now, in previous verses, Gideon has had direct conversations with the angel of the Lord, which we find out later on is Jesus himself. So Jesus has appeared to Gideon in person as a man and spoken to Gideon personally. And now after this battle, it appears Gideon has a little bit of self-esteem some self-esteem issues. And he's a bit self-aware because he's specifically asking or making a garment, a very fine, sacred, pure gold garment. Perhaps he's thinking that if I wear this, God will hear me. But why is he thinking that? God has been speaking to him directly. And I think sometimes when we experience success, we feel like we've got something to keep up, a reputation to maintain, something to prove. Okay, now we've done it. Now we need to maintain this. We've made these friends. We've put ourselves out there. Now the world knows us, or at least the circle of friends we've been trying to impress know us. Now we need to maintain this stance, and we do that through our own methods. Because it actually describes this ephod, this lifeless, harmless piece of clothing, as a trap. And so I'd like for us to look, as we experience success, what are those things that are trapping us and making us a little bit too reliant on them and not enough on God. I want to read a really quick passage from Matthew 19, and this is Jesus talking and just describing how it's not wrong to be successful, but it does make it really difficult. And I think this is something confusing in our heads. If you have the more traditional view like I did, that is, if Jesus doesn't want us to be successful, he wants the success for him. We need to be meek and humble and in the background. He doesn't want us to be rich. He doesn't want us to be famous. And this is not actually what he says. He does say, however, that it's super difficult, but not impossible. I'll be reading from chapter 19, verse 21. Jesus told the man, "If you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." But when the young man heard this, he went away sad, for he had many possessions. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, it is very hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. I'll say it again. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." The disciples were astounded. "Then who in the world can be saved?" they asked. Jesus looked at them intently and said, "Humanly speaking, it is impossible, but with God, everything is possible." So if you feel like it is humanly impossible for you to give up what you have in order to follow Jesus, that's okay. It's humanly impossible sometimes, but with God it is possible. Consider talking to God like you would a normal person and just be like, "Lord, I don't want to give this to you. This vest that I've been wearing makes me feel closer to you. It makes me feel like I have the right to talk to you. I'm insecure. I have a lot to prove, and I can't risk failing because all of these people count on me. God, will you take all of these feelings that I have, these insecurities, and will you make something beautiful out of them? Will you teach me humility, and will you help me? God, will you help me to be humble while I am feeling so insecure?" And if that's a prayer you need to pray today, I encourage you to pray that. Okay, story time. I do love stories, and I did promise you one, so here it is. I love watching sports movies. I don't know if you do as well. I find them super encouraging, inspiring, and motivational. One of my favorite movies about a sports star is Chariots of Fire. This is about a runner. I can't remember. I think he was a 100-meter runner. But in the end, he ends up running 400 meters because the 100-meter race is on a Sunday, which he cannot run. And he ends up winning the 400-meter race. He's a Scottish man called Liddell, and his story is inspiring. My favorite scene in the whole movie is when he's running the 400, right at the last moment. He is throwing his head back with his shoulders open. And basically there's this commentary going while he's doing this. I mean, it looks kind of funny. He's speaking to Jenny, his sister, and he's basically telling her that, yes, Jenny, God made me for a purpose. He made me for China, where he was later a missionary, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And this is just the most beautiful story of ambition for me. He could really find the balance between ambition and godliness, where he really believed that it was godly to be running. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but he had an ability, and he used his ability to glorify God. What did that mean for him? He didn't stand on stadiums and preach the word while he was running. It's not just about glorifying God vocally. It can just be doing your best and feeling his delight, feeling your body being strong and loving the feeling of God smiling on you and thanking him for the body that he's given you, if that's your ability. If your ability is to host really well and put on incredible dinners for people that bless people, watch as people enjoy the food that you've created and feel so comfortable in the space that you've made, and delight not in your ability but in your God-given ability, and delight in how God is smiling and watching and having so much fun himself just watching you do what you're good at, because that brings God joy. So if there's anything that you are particularly good at, why don't you try this week to explore that a little bit more? Try something ambitious, something new, something that you've never done before in that ability, and just delight yourself in how God is smiling on you today. And now for some practical tips. This is probably my favorite part of all of my episodes, where I get to give you some really practical things that you can apply to your life. I love this specifically, so I hope that you've enjoyed it too. So we have 3 guests, and I asked these 3 people to give me 3 tips on how they would recommend that you can be ambitious in your life that will make an impact in the world around you and in your circles. Okay, are you ready? Our first friend is Paul from Tarsus. He actually wrote a few books in the Bible, and I'm going to start by reading you a snippet of his story, and from that we're going to pull 3 things that I think if he were here right now, he would tell you this is something that could really help you when you are looking to be ambitious. I'm reading from 2 Corinthians 12, and just before this chapter, because context is really important when reading the Bible and not just pulling out verse by verse, but rather looking at it through context, what's just happened is that he's had a vision, and it was incredible. It was something like in the 3rd heaven or something. And he's talking about this experience from verse 5, chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians. That experience is worth boasting about, but I'm not going to do it. I will boast only about my weaknesses. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so, because I would be telling the truth. But I won't do it, because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and to keep me from becoming proud. 3 times I begged for the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Wow, we have the opportunity to boast sometimes, and it may not be in an arrogant way, but we're talking about hard things, and Paul is recognizing in his heart this would be proud. I'm not going to do this. But still, he goes to God and asks for help. 3 tips from Paul. The first one, I believe, is he would say to pray. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but when you are going into something new, something that could bring you great success or great failure, and you're feeling like your identity is being tested, or if you are experiencing a lot of success or a lot of failure, talk to God about it. Paul prayed and asked for this thorn to be taken out of his side. 3 times he prayed, and each time God responded. So I would think that if Paul was here today, he'd tell you to speak to God about your insecurities, about your ambitions, about your dreams, about those thorns in your side, because he does respond and he will respond to you. Tip number 2, trust God's word. God responded and said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power works best in your weakness. And I don't know how long it took Paul to accept this, but eventually he did, because he starts by saying, guys, I boast in weakness because God said his power works through me. And now I want to have all the weakness. I want to have all the thorns. If God said that his power works through weakness, I want all of it. It could have been, yes, Paul, I'll take the thorn away because that's how I'm best going to glorify myself through you. But instead it was, okay, Paul, I'm not going to take it away because that's how I'm going to glorify myself through you. And he did. And God's aim is to bring glory to himself. And so we've got to receive his answer and take courage from his answer. Paul's tip number 3, I believe it would be to embrace weakness. Weakness is not a bad thing. God can use any situation for good. It doesn't matter if it's a really bad experience that we've been through, or some really stupid thing that we've done, or I don't know, something where we made a bunch of mistakes, or we chose the wrong thing, or something happened to us that was out of our control. If we're weak, God is still strong. His power can work through our weakness. So many times I've seen when I've gone through a dark time, I have been able to better love the people around me because my heart is super soft after that. It's not straight after usually it's a bit hard and hurt, but often hurt makes us super sensitive to those around us who are also struggling. And how better for God to glorify himself through us, through our weakness, by loving people through us. And yeah, if you are trying something new for the first time and you're not doing as well as you'd hoped, pray and trust God that he will use it for good, and that even though it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. It's still worth it all. Our next friend is Gideon from the tribe of Manasseh. I'm going to be jumping a little bit in the Bible today. So we're going back to Judges 6 and 7 to look at the beginning of the story of Gideon really quickly before he gives us 3 truths. Now, I asked him for 3 tips. I gave him the same question. I put in the same request for him as Paul and our next friend, but he came back with 3 truths. So don't ask me, Gideon's weird. But we'll look at his story and then we'll look at those 3 truths. Okay, I'll be reading from chapter 6, verses 11. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Ebezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of the winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. Just so that you guys know, grain is usually threshed at the highest point that they can on the threshing floor, because the wind comes through and takes the chaff away, so that all that's left is the grain. It must be so difficult to be threshing at the bottom of a wine press, which is dark and wet. Certainly not the right conditions. Why is he doing it there? Because they are experiencing great oppression from their enemies. So really, he's being a coward, just to put it straight. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all of this happened to us? And where are all of the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say, 'The Lord brought us out of Egypt'? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites." Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest of the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." The Lord said to him, "I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." Chapter 7. So Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, they changed his name, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they have saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not." When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, "Divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream." Only 300 of the men drank with their hands. All the others got on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. The Lord told Gideon, "With these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home." Later on it says, "That night the Lord said, 'Get up, go down to the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah. Listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack." 3 tips from Gideon. Here we go. Number 1, God is with you. Again, more of a truth. If you are experiencing success, or if you are experiencing humiliation or weakness, like Gideon was at this point where God found him, the truth that God said to Gideon was that I am with you. And Gideon did go on to test God on this, but once he realized for himself that God was with him, he actually went to battle and defeated an entire army and did awesome things and could testify at the end, God was with me. He didn't leave me. And so I think that if he was looking back, telling his younger self, his past self, or telling us one truth that we can hold on to before we go ahead and do something ambitious, God is with you. The second comes from chapter 7. God's plan is awesome. I don't know if you know the story of Gideon, and I don't have time to read the story, the account of the battle, but if you have time, go and read it, because what God did with these 300 men that he selected from 22,000 down to 300, fighting an army of thousands, they won with clay jars and torches. It doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense at the time, but God still won, and that was part of his plan. So if God is telling you to do something and it doesn't make sense as you're going into this new thing, this thing that requires a lot of bravery as it is, and he's saying to give up more or shed more or become more vulnerable or to ask for more or to do it with less, whatever he's asking you, give him a try, because his plan is really cool. And at the end of the day, it's so much better than your plan and my plan. Truth number 3 from Gideon: God encourages. We can see that the night before the attack happened, Gideon was sleeping and God woke him up and said, okay, now's the time. But if you are afraid, do this, do that, you will be encouraged and you will be eager to do what I've called you to do. God is not a harsh taskmaster. He doesn't ignore our feelings. He doesn't ignore the fact that we're afraid. And I think that we can come to him and say, God, I want to try this new thing. I've been wanting to try it for a long time. But the thing is, I've just been too scared. I'm afraid. And wait to hear God's response. He's going to prepare you. You don't have to worry. You don't have to fake it till you make it. You can be real with God and he will encourage you. Our next friend, who is going to not give us 3 tips or 3 truths, I asked him. He's giving us 1 tip. But to be fair, it is a 5-part tip. It is an acronym, a 5-part acronym for S.H.A.P.E, SHAPE. How God can shape us to make an impact in our world today. And so the letters stand for spiritual gifts, heart, abilities, personality, and experiences. If you're not sure what to start or where to look for or if it's the right thing, maybe this acronym will help you. So the first thing you want to look at is, what spiritual gifts do you have? These are the intangible virtues that God has already given you, that you have in you. They are our invisible strengths. And if you're not sure what they are in you, you can pray and ask God, and he will certainly reveal it to you. There are some spiritual gift tests, like the S.H.A.P.E test, for example. There are different gifts that we can have that will really make a difference. And once we know our gifts, it could be a little bit more of one and a little bit less of another, not necessarily only one. For example, I did the S.H.A.P.E test and I came out 29% pastor, but 23% of another 3, and then evangelical was last at 13%. So I possess a little bit of each thing, but mostly pastoral, which will help me to decide how I can make a difference in the body of Christ and what I want to work on. If I'm really good at pastoring, I'm not going to go work on my evangelical skills, because God has given me the gift of pastoring and not so much evangelical. It makes me cringe to walk up to a stranger and tell them about Jesus. But my heart is really big for people in our church and for people outside of our church who are struggling. And I have a super soft heart and a big heart for those people, hearing their stories and walking through their journeys with them. And that's just a funny example of how we can use our spiritual gifts to bring impact to our world around us. The second one is our hearts. These are things and people that have grabbed our heart, grabbed our attention, that we feel something towards, that we are passionate about. So this could be hospitality. This could be a certain type of people, homeless or childless, for instance. One of the things my heart is turned towards is singles, and combining that with my ability, which I'll get into just now, for hospitality. I really love and I'm passionate about hosting singles in our home, having a conversation with singles, making friends with singles, because I appreciated this so much. Often hard things are probably based on experience, which we're getting into later. So these are all interwangled. I don't know. The A is for abilities. These are our God-given talents or strengths materially. For example, for Eric Liddell, it was his ability to run fast. For you, it may be the ability to sing. It may be the ability to smile really nicely and bring a lot of joy to people. It may be the ability to act. It may be the ability to make really good food. whatever are your abilities, you probably have more than one. You probably have some stronger ones and some weaker ones. Look at those and see, what am I really good at? What comes naturally to me? What does my body allow me to do really well? And what have I been gifted in ability-wise that I could use to make an impact? Fourthly, personality. This is a whole medley of things that are our habits, our vices, our quirks, our strengths and our weaknesses, everything that makes you who you are and makes you unique. And this was super, super encouraging that our personality can actually aid to making an impact, even our bad habits and our vices, because our impact is so unique because of our personality. Lots of people can run fast. Lots of people can teach, have the spiritual gift of teaching. Lots of people have a heart for homeless people. But when you do all of those three things with my personality, it brings such a unique offering to the world that literally no one else can provide. No one else has the exact same personality as you. And so you have a very beautiful gift in your personality, even those things that you don't like about your personality, whether you're shy or too loud or whatever it is that you think you're too much of this or too little of that. God can still use that for his glory because he gave that to you. He blessed you with this personality for a reason. And we're growing. God can use our personality to bring impact to people. The E of shape is our experiences. And this is a bit of a tough one because a lot of us feel at mercy to our experiences, good or bad. A bad experiences is why I cannot do the thing that I want to do. The thing is that God is able to work through our experiences. So we are certainly not at the mercy of our experiences. I mentioned a little while back in the episode that even if we make stupid mistakes, even if we do stupid things or we do really good things, God can work through that. And I'm speaking so much about that because I always get a bit despondent when I've messed up and I think, just be better, cover this up, or get over it really quickly so that I can begin to make an impact. Because because of that thing, I'm tarnished and now I can't make an impact. And I just need to get that out of the way. Or even in the moment, I'm thinking, how am I going to be useful to God? How am I going to be loved by my friends? How am I going to be kind? How am I going to make the difference that I want to make? How am I going to fulfill the dreams that I want to achieve because of this thing that I've done or these things that I've done? And God can work through that. He can work through our experiences. I want to read you this quick insert from Rick Warren from his book. And it says, God never wastes an experience. Fortunate experiences open your eyes to God's beauty, and unfortunate experiences will show us how God brings good out of bad. If we ask God for help, He will give it to us. And no matter what shape that assistance takes, we will be better off for that experience if we stay in Christ's course. So I hope you take encouragement today from the S.H.A.P.E acronym. I hope it's something that's easy for you to remember and something that you can consider as you are considering your next ambitious step. There's one more question that I had that I wanted to tackle, and maybe you have it too. And this is God really worth all the glory? And I just want to touch on it. I don't want to dive too deep because I'm still learning about this myself. But I want to start by saying God is God. He's not a human. We were created in God's image. He was not created in our image. And often when we think about God as a human. We think about God as one like us. Sometimes I think about God as the perfect human. Okay, so he's perfect, but he's a perfect human. Like he's human without imperfections, the faults that I have. That's not true. He's God. He's perfect and he's God. And this could maybe help us to have the correct perspective of him. I really struggle with submitting my will to God's will because we're used to submitting our will to other people's will. But God is not a person. So if we think about submitting our will to a holy, glorious deity who is created the universe, is nothing like us, beyond our imagination. We can't even imagine what he's like. And if I think of submitting my will to that being God, I'm like, okay, that's fine. Yes, that makes sense. But if I think about submitting my will to this guy that's my dad, father figure, that's in the Bible, and he said a lot of cool things, then I'm like, nah, I don't really want to submit my will to that. So it really matters how we see God and view him. If we view him in the box that we put him in, or we view him as unimaginable, holy, glorious, it will make a difference. And it also addresses the issue that we sometimes have, which is we can't picture anyone seeking glory for himself without arrogance, without being proud. The idea of a person seeking glory for himself turns us off. It's, who do you think you are? Like, oh, that is so arrogant and so proud. Can you just get off your high horse? So one of the people who was sharing with us at our church on Sunday, he was preaching. His name is James Tillman. And he said something really cool. It might have been a reference or a quote, but I want to read it to you. He said, God is the only being in the universe who can't be diagnosed with narcissism. Narcissism is what gives weight to that arrogance. It's that negativity. It's that the world revolves around me, but in a very negative way. And a lot of people can be diagnosed with this thing. But God is the only being in the universe who cannot be diagnosed with narcissism. It is impossible for him to be narcissistic. Because of this, he is the only one who can say with a completely pure heart, everything is about me. And the thing is, when everything is about God, everything works. And that's where I want to leave it. I don't want to dive more into, because I just don't know how. But I want to leave it there and encourage you that test it and see. But it's like one of these antinomies that God can be non-arrogant, humble, not proud, and seek all the glory for himself at the same time. It's one of those two true things that we have to submit to in obedience to God. And it just works. When God gets all the glory, it just works. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. It was a bit meaty. Yeah, just hearing more about the risks of success, plus some tips and helps. I really look forward to hearing from you guys if you start anything new. We're not on this journey alone. I have already begun to find a lot of encouragement just in producing these episodes. I hope that you too can find encouragement in this and find yourself becoming bolder, braver, and more confident because you are more aware of God's delight, absolute delight in you as you are trying these new things. And no shame, no shame. I pray that this is a season for you that is not filled with shame, that it's filled with a lot of courage, like these beautiful people in the Bible that just fought battles and taught and used their gifts for God and his kingdom and found much joy in that. And I pray that for you today. Thank you for joining me today on Chocolate Cake on Tuesday. If you would like to hear more content just like this, don't forget to like this episode, leave me a comment, or if you're on Spotify, a review. Share this episode with a friend or family member and subscribe to my channel and show. Now there's lots more cake to go around, so if you'd like another slice, please stay a bit, listen to another episode, and have some tea. Happy Tuesday!